In the heart of the Red Keep, a grand feast was underway, the sound of laughter and music filling the air. But amidst the merriment, one man stood out, Robert Baratheon, the king who had won the throne through rebellion and bloodshed. His laughter boomed through the hall, but his eyes told a different story, a story of loss and longing. For Robert, the Iron Throne was not a prize, but a curse, a reminder of all that he had lost, including the love of his life, Lyanna Stark. In the depths of the Red Keep, a darker scene was unfolding. Joffrey Baratheon, the young king, stood in a damp, cold dungeon, his face twisted in a cruel smile. Before him stood Ned Stark, the former hand of the king, his hands bound behind his back. The air was thick with tension, and the only sound was the faint rustling of clothes and the soft whisper of the torches. And then, in an instant, it was over. The blade fell and Ned Stark's life was ended, a victim of Joffrey's cruel whim. On the battle-scarred fields of Blackwater Bay, a fierce and bloody battle was underway. Stannis Baratheon, one of the claimants to the Iron Throne, stood on the deck of his ship, his eyes fixed on the chaos before him. The air was thick with smoke and the sound of clashing steel filled the air. The battle was intense, with ships burning and men clashing in a frenzy of steel and blood. And yet, despite the chaos, Stannis stood firm, his face set in a determined expression, his will unbroken. In the vast, open plains of Essos, a new power was rising. Daenerys Targaryen, the last known heir of House Targaryen, stood before her army, her dragons at her side. The air was filled with anticipation, and the sound of drums and war cries echoed across the plain. Daenerys, with her flowing hair and her crown, was a vision of power and glory, her eyes fixed on the horizon, her will unbroken. For she was the queen, the rightful ruler of the Seven Kingdoms, and she would stop at nothing to reclaim her throne. In the dark, dimly lit rooms of the Red Keep, Robert Baratheon, the king, sat alone, his face buried in his hands. The weight of his responsibilities, the burden of his past, had taken its toll on him. He was a shadow of the man he once was, the warrior who had won the throne through blood and steel. Now he was a king lost in his thoughts, haunted by the ghosts of his past, his eyes red from drink and his heart heavy with sorrow. In the grand, opulent throne room of the Red Keep, Joffrey Baratheon, the young king, sat on the Iron Throne, his face twisted in a cruel smile. The air was thick with fear, and the courtiers trembled at his every word. For Joffrey was a tyrant, a ruler who cared little for the welfare of his people, and much for his own selfish desires. He was a king but not a just one, and his reign would be remembered for its cruelty and its bloodshed. The War of the Five Kings had begun, and the Seven Kingdoms were ablaze with conflict. The various kings, each with their own armies and their own claims to the Iron Throne, clashed in a frenzy of steel and blood. The battle was intense, with villages burning and men dying, and the outcome was far from certain. For in this war there could be only one winner, and the loser would be cast aside, forgotten in the annals of history. In the dark, damp caves of the Dothraki, Daenerys Targaryen, the last known heir of House Targaryen, stood before a group of fierce warriors, her dragons at her side. The air was thick with anticipation, and the sound of drums and war cries echoed through the cave. Daenerys, with her flowing hair and her crown, was a vision of power and glory, her eyes fixed on the warriors before her, her will unbroken. For she was the queen, the rightful ruler of the Seven Kingdoms, and she would stop at nothing to reclaim her throne. In the grand, opulent bedrooms of the Red Keep, Cersei Lannister, the Queen Regent, stood before a large, ornate mirror, her eyes fixed on her reflection. The air was thick with intrigue and the sound of whispers and plotting echoed through the halls. Cersei, with her flowing hair and her crown, was a vision of power and cunning, her eyes fixed on her reflection, her mind working overtime to stay ahead of her enemies. For she was the queen, the ruler of the Seven Kingdoms, and she would stop at nothing to maintain her power. The battle for King's Landing had begun, and the city was ablaze with conflict. The various armies, each with their own claims to the Iron Throne, clashed in a frenzy of steel and blood. The battle was intense, with buildings burning and men dying, and the outcome was far from certain. For in this war there could be only one winner, and the loser would be cast aside, forgotten in the annals of history. In the end, the Iron Throne stood empty, a reminder of the power and the glory that it represents. The characters, each with their own stories and their own struggles, looked back on the events of the tale and the lessons they had learned. For in the Game of Thrones there is no winner, only losers, and the pursuit of power and glory comes at a great cost. The throne, once the symbol of power and prestige, now stood as a reminder of the destruction and the chaos that it had brought, a cautionary tale of the dangers of ambition and the corrupting influence of power. Please like the video and subscribe my channel to get the latest video update on notification.